En, två, tre, en, två.
I first heard of Jacob Prasch about a year after reading about Bible prophecy. I'd gone from the Jewish author Joel Rosenberg to the Arab J.D. Farag and found that since J.D. was from Calvary Chapel, I searched the Calvary Chapel movement's podcast archives for teaching in a similar vein. So eventually I ended up with this Calvary Chapel affiliate, 412 Church, pastored by Tom Hughes, and he had invited Jacob Prasch to teach. The first time I heard Jacob Prasch, I was kind of blown away because he was unlike any other Bible teacher I'd encountered. He shot from the hip and was bold enough to name and shame false teachers. So for a few years in my free time, I'd listened to Jacob Prasch, and I pretty much exhausted his few hundred teachings. I was happy therefore about 4 years ago when he started a channel on YouTube called Moriel TV. I happily recommended Jacob Prasch to friends, but not as the only teacher. In this now deleted page on my website, powerplaypause.blog, I listed the following teachers as ones I'd recommend: Martin Lloyd-Jones, Bill Randalls, John Piper, James White, Jacob Prasch, Phil Johnson, Mike Riccardi, and Jack Hibbs. Pretty rounded selection, I think. So I listened to all the above about the same amount and gained different things from each. I didn't have just one teacher. However, Jacob Prasch was the only one of the list I didn't categorize the same way as the others. The group was expositors and teachers, and Jacob Prasch, with his more abrasive attitude, was just categorized as Prasch. Because of the way the others taught, having a Bible in front of me was always necessary as they exposited the scriptures. Jacob Prasch, being categorized differently by myself, never really needed the Bible because he didn't really exposit. He just took a familiar story from older New Testament, then drew a comparison to another well-known part, or brought up some Jewish understanding which wouldn't really be proved by having a Bible in front of me, as it was more of an interpretational thing. So I kind of took his teaching at face value, that being coming from an apparently Jewish person sharing ancient understandings. His type of teaching really defied the need to fact-check. Add to that how he'd bring up his research into false teachers and false movements. He placed himself at the epicenter or fringes of them all, giving personal accounts of what he'd seen, so again, I had believed them. When Jacob Prasch was abrasive and labelled a nut, I'd say things like, "Oh, that's just Jacob Prasch. He's from New Jersey and he has attitude." You see, I once studied in New Jersey, so I was kind of familiar with his way of speaking. When Jacob Prasch spoke ill of people I listened to like Phil Johnson, I chalked it down to him making a mountain out of a molehill and didn't really mind too much. I viewed Phil Johnson in a different way to Jacob Prasch, since Phil posted me a set of CDs on Jonah to Tokyo, which helped me when I was weeks old in the faith. Same with James White. Jacob Prasch didn't like him either, but James White was instrumental in my coming to faith one cold winter in Japan. Besides my different views on some of Jacob Prasch's targets, I never questioned anything else he said, and appreciated his comedic accounts of his evangelizing Mormons and describing cult members. So much so that I made 5 or 6 videos in the style of a 16-bit Nintendo video game with Jacob Prasch's audio clips presented as sage advice. I often repeated Jacob Prasch's parasexusin description to help friends understand how false teachers place truth beside error. You can actually see my short presentation from early 2018 on my Vimeo channel in English and in Japanese. Around then, early 2018, I drifted a bit away from Jacob Prasch with more interest in the apologetics work of the likes of Apologia Studios that was affiliated with James White. Out of interest, in summer 2018, I searched James White's back catalogue of talks on his YouTube channel Alpha and Omega Ministries in case he ever dealt with Jacob Prasch, and this video came up. In it, James White reviews a video Jacob Prasch had made about him, and James played the video Prasch made, which was all his usual statements and opinions and scriptural understandings in defense of a point. As usual, I unthinkingly accepted what he said. But then James White replayed the video and paused it at various points to challenge Jacob Prasch's arguments. And every single argument Jacob Prasch made, every single one turned out to be void, logically void. In each case, Jacob Prasch failed in giving substance to his views, or avoided dealing with information or challenge, or used red herrings to escape.
You put a circle there, failure. Failed to substantiate assertion. Used inappropriate language to create emotion and did not substantiate. This is how you analyze these things.
And he involved himself again and again in ad hominem. It was like the Wizard of Oz had his scholarly, all-wise facade knocked down, and behind the facade was an intellectual midget holding a book listing strategies for sounding smart when being a moron. It was actually painful to watch. Not painful because of how embarrassing it was to watch Jacob Prasch being exposed, not as the great apologist, but as the Houdini-esque apologist from legitimate argumentation. It was painful for me because I had accepted all his false argumentation thoughtlessly for several years, and had even made a handful of little videos promoting his argumentation style on my Vimeo channel. I felt hollow whilst watching it, and after watching it. The feeling lasted for about an hour. I felt stranded in the middle of a wilderness that I had been dropped into. It is not a good feeling. It was the pain of cognitive dissonance, one of the things, coincidentally, that I studied, and oddly enough, the psychological effect I was at the time most interested in. Cognitive dissonance being the emotional pain you experience when hearing information that runs contrary to your own beliefs. Information that challenges deeply held views. With cognitive dissonance, you have two major choices when encountering it. One, you can go to fellow believers of whatever the item of belief is and hear the opposite sweet-sounding consonant information from them that you want to hear, information that reaffirms the challenged belief. Or two, you take the dissonant information and check it out, and research and be a Berean and find out if it is true. I was fortunate because I was separate from any other followers of Jacob Prasch, so I couldn't hear consonant information, and I was left to have my beliefs about Jacob Prasch, the great teacher, challenged. I soon after went to my Vimeo channel and deleted the handful of video game style films of Jacob Prasch's argumentation I'd made. Then I took Dr. James White's deconstruction video and uploaded it to the channel to help others.
4 times that any teacher of logic would fail this man, and I don't think we've gotten 60 seconds in. 4 places where inappropriate, illogical argumentation, violation of the fundamental rules of argumentation being utilized.
It was like my eyes were opened to who Jacob Prasch really was. For now, I just couldn't ever see him as a good teacher. I could only see him for what he actually was, that being a loud, aggressive, angry railer pretending to be an intellectual. I also could no longer refer to him as Prasch. He was from that day Prasch. Around that time, oddly enough, Prasch had also changed in another way, for he had taken on a new Moriel TV social media man called Service Christi, also known as Joshua Chavez. And with my eyes opened to Prasch, seeing Prasch and Joshua Chavez utilizing their phony argumentation to damn Christians and non-Christians alike, I saw them for what they were. 2 idiots rolling around in Christian camouflage whilst engaging in warfare with the body of Christ. So that's my testimony of following, then ceasing to follow Jacob Prasch for Mike and Pat Rogers' blog closingstages.net, and I hope you found it helpful.